I didn't know how to do that. So it's like, we know that you're supposed to be like, no, yeah, the one of the, they say, I don't remember. So what is it?
Also,
I made up.
yeah.
Yeah, and then.
Okay, so we don't fly, right, we just have that person.
Right, like it's like.
Oh, you
That's and then like. Cool.
Yeah, yeah.
We're gonna get it.
I guess.
Just kind of like angled there, so
Yeah.
like, see what we're like looking at.
Yeah.
What's the second?
So I know this class hasn't started, so you said. I'm in here. Do you think this class can be offered as a summer school class? Yeah. Okay. Because I actually signed up to summer school class, but I didn't know what that looks like and that means. So we're trying to talk about this class actually happened. Traditionally, it's 4 hours, or is it online? Summer school class. So you think this class can be done online?
I like discussion.
I like lecture videos. And then
We'll see how many people sign up and if it goes. So that's fine. Well,
It's not fair.
so it's that time. I do want to offer to you that, so we typically pray before class, and there are a number of ways to pray. One is a formal process where you say, the Lord's Prayer or something like that. But there's also opportunities to do devotion, because a devotion can be a prayer, right? So we know other religious practices, they have set times to pray. In our particular religious practice, when do we stop praying? Never, right? So the scripture says, pray without ceasing. So we should always have a prayer on our mind or on our heart. And some of you in this class are just eloquent when it comes to giving or saying prayers, and some of us may not necessarily be as eloquent. The point of the prayer isn't to have the best words or to inspire the best, whatever, but to actually speak from your heart and asking for God to move from your heart more so than from eloquent words. So I don't want anyone to feel intimidated. We all should have a prayer ready directly from our hearts because we're praying without ceasing. But for those people who would like to pray or give a devotion, please prepare one ahead of time. You may have seen a pattern before each class of how we start, and so you can prepare whatever's on your heart for that particular time. Does that make sense? All right, cool. It's been suggested to pass out a handout or have people sign up, but that feels a bit artificial to me. And I want us to engage in a more kind of organic and genuine process of engaging in the classroom. So there is that. So having said all that, is there anyone who would like to lead in a word of prayer before we begin? Sure. Please.
Father God, I thank you so much for this day and the amazing weather we've had this last couple of weeks, Lord. I thank you just for this community at Bethel, where we come together and we're just encouraged to learn more about you and love you and continually have a prayer on our hearts. And I pray that as we go through this class, Lord, that we will all be offered something that is of value to us, that we will be able to engage and truly get something out of this experience. I pray that you bless the days of everyone in this room and that you will help us to continue on to stay focused on our studies and through all of the business of life. I pray this in your name. Amen.
Amen. Have people noticed anything about those Austin bombings? Anyone heard anything about those Austin bombings? Right. What kinds of things have you heard about them, or what is that about for folks who may not have heard much or been keeping up with those? Yes.
A 20-something-year-old kid who had no job and had really no training or anything. He placed, I think it was like 4 bombs throughout his community, and he blew them up, and then the feds eventually shot him.
Yeah, and I think he also died with a bomb in his car, right?
Well, he got out of the car first, I believe.
Oh, really? Okay. Wow. What else? Yes.
He was delivering packages to houses, and then when the packages were attempted to be opened, they would explode.
Okay.
There were many injuries that were happening because of the exploding.
Okay, so he was delivering these packages or having the packages delivered. Because I think one bomb went off at a UPS site that was going to deliver the bomb. Anything else of particular interest? Yes.
Most of the subjects that were the people that received the bombs were minorities.
Were minorities, and specifically, what minority? Take a guess. No, black. Right? No. So we've had these school shootings, right? And I shared one of my hypotheses, right? Earlier, that a number of this stuff is because we're not doing a good job of dealing with middle class to lower middle class white males. Like, we're not doing a good job with that. And then this happens, right? I think that's interesting. Any thoughts about that? Because people are thinking about kind of these school shootings and now this bombing thing. Any thoughts about that kind of stuff?
One thing that I've always kind of thought about, especially with like the shootings, is how different things would be if it was like a black student instead of a white student. And like what that would do to our society. Because like we don't really hear it as like a white person problem with the school shootings, but I just think that I just wonder that if it was a black student, how our society would react to it, if we would react to it differently, how we're reacting to it now.
Yeah. If it were a black student, do you think there would be a different response to it? I mean, that's a good question to ask and a good way to kind of think. Now, again, I want to say I'm not race baiting. I'm pointing out obvious. I'm pointing out the facts of the blah blah blah. But I think that's an interesting purview. How would it be in the media? I don't know that when so those bombs, there were 4 bombs that went off, but I didn't see those as like major news issues. I mean, issues in the news, given all the other stuff that's kind of going on, which is also interesting. So first of all, what is the root of why this person did the bomb and why people are shooting up schools? What is the root of that? from our perspective, given this context that we're in? Sin. S-I-N, right? So we understand that the devil comes to kill, to kill, steal, and destroy, right? So we know that. So we understand how to deal with the spiritual aspect of that. We have to pray for these folks, right? We have to pray for our schools. We have to pray, so we have to do those things. And so we know how to deal with that. But yeah, so that is an important thing to take in consideration. But I'm also very concerned about why and how this gets framed versus how it would get framed if it was someone else. And what do you think? Do you think it would be dramatically different if it was? So say if it was a black student or a black assailant, do you think it would be handled differently, or are people just making too much of the race as it relates to these things? Yes.
I think it'd be more centered around the race rather than gun control, in my opinion. So I feel like instead of just saying, oh, guns, it would be, oh, black kid and guns, but more so on that, you know. I mean, one of the books we're reading in another class that we just read, it was, if you have a disruptive white student in the classroom who's just being kind of punk, it's not normal, but it's taken a lot lighter than a black student in the classroom who's being disruptive. It's seen as a social issue. So I just feel like that's kind of where it would be targeted.
I have a friend who's a state senator from Elk River, and he is proposing a bill that would hold protesters financially accountable to for protests. And I on the surface, I can't necessarily say that's not a bad idea, right? People should be held accountable for their stuff. But I also think that it's interesting that when sports teams win, because there were protests at the University of Minnesota when the teams would win, where people are knocking over stuff and burning stuff, but there wasn't any. They weren't trying to pass a law when that kind of stuff happens about those people compensating the university or the city for their officers. So I always think those kinds of things are always interesting in how they get treated in terms of how we define things. Yes, please.
How are they going to do that? Like how is the bill being passed? Like with finding the protest or making protesters pay.
Yeah, and so I can't say that I've read the particulars of the bill. I've only heard Senator House Representative Zerwas talk about doing that, but I'm not exactly sure how you do that, or if people are there, do you just arrest them and then allocate a certain amount to them? I'm not exactly sure how they'll enforce that.
Okay.
I'm not real sure. But it is clear that there's something going on in our world that we have to pay attention to. And I find it interesting that the Austin attacks were not considered or have not been labeled terrorist attacks. Right? But had this been a person of Muslim faith, right, or a different kind of ethnicity, I believe that would have been the label. And does anyone know what the definition of terrorist is, or terrorist attack? Can you just Google that, just real quick, what that definition is? What is terrorist attack, or what is a terrorist? What would constitute a terrorist attack?
person who uses unlawful violence and intimidation, especially against civilians in the pursuit of political aims.
In the pursuit of political aims. So typically when we end up talking about these things, people will talk about mental illness as being one of those things. And that will play into, it can play into that stuff. It also kind of is a scapegoat place for people to say that this is a lone wolf, right? This is a blah, blah. But there seems to be a pattern of these lone wolves of people who are doing these activities. And so, do you think that those Austin bombings in particular would constitute constitute terrorism as defined by that definition?
Probably not that definition, because I mean, was he doing it for any political reasons? Or was he just doing it because he was disenfranchised and wanted attention?
Well, so great questions. So did he do it just because he was disenfranchised and he wanted attention? Was it politically motivated? What answer can we come up with to that second question? Because we don't know the answer to the first one. We won't, because he's dead. But what can we look at for the answer to that question? The second question, was it politically motivated? Yes.
Well, kind of like internet history. If he was involved in any groups,
Okay.
or hate groups.
Yeah, we can look at his internet history and that kind of thing. But I want to look at some place even more telling. Yes.
Look at his victims.
Look at his victims. Look at his victims. Was he making a political statement with his victims? I would suggest that he was, because he picked out particular victims to make a particular point. So it should be labeled terrorism. Why do you think we might be hesitant to label those particular acts not as terroristic? Yes.
Terrorism is meant to incite fear.
Uh-huh.
And so the more fear that the more things that we label as terrorism, the more things we inherently become afraid of.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that there is the notion that people want to have things not be a terroristic threat. Once they hear that it's not that, then they kind of brush it under the rug and pretend that it's not as bad as it was.
If you're a Black person in Austin receiving a package, might you have some terror? So why might we be slow to call this thing terrorism?
Because wouldn't that instill the fear of like receiving packaging? So like would they, like online systems not be gaining income anymore because people won't be getting, like wanting to do that?
So maybe it'll have a negative impact on UPS, right? Or delivery services. Why else might we be slow to call this particular kind of thing? Yes.
It's a negative label against the dominant group.
Because it's a negative label against the dominant group. It's a negative label against the dominant group. What then becomes visible when we do something like that? Whiteness becomes visible. What do I mean by that? And we've talked about this in class. Well, no, I'll just do this example too. This is just a good example. Pretty good, huh? What's the hardest thing for a fish to recognize? That he's in water. Can't recognize that he's in water. So when we talk about this, when we talk about recognizing that there, okay, and I'm gonna say this, and I mean this with lots of compassion, there is something wrong with our system that white boys and white men, the young man was not much older than you guys. I think he was 24 or something like that. There's something wrong with our system that to get attention or to even fly under the radar that this kind of stuff could develop. There's something wrong that we can't call it for what it is. And so we have to call it for what it is. 2 parts, right? We have to call it sin. So we have to continually pray and say, Lord, give us the guidance to talk to our young people and that kind of stuff. And the other thing is to recognize that we have to start calling this stuff what it is. Our world is full of people who want to hurt other people just because they look different from them, or they think that they have things that they don't. And we have to call that for what it is. And I don't think we've been able to kind of figure that stuff out. So I'm going to give you the tools so you can call that stuff out and stand firm in responding to those things. So there was also another African-American killed in his backyard. The police originally said he had a crowbar, then they said he had a gun. It turns out he just had his cell phone. Don't know the particulars of it. I know that's a stressful job. Couldn't say what I would do in any given situation. But again, looking at patterns of things, we have to start asking questions about that, right? We also know that Officer Noor, who was a Somali man, who shot and killed a woman who had dual citizenship in Australia and the United States, who happened to be white. The officer was just charged with manslaughter. Oh no, I don't know if it's manslaughter. I know that he was charged. Let me back up. So that's an interesting thing because earlier there in that same county there was a Hispanic or / white officer who shot a black man who was also in both cases I think he was armed and she was not armed but was shot. So looking at those 2 cases, you can't compare them because they're not apples to apples, but it is interesting, some patterns that our justice system is playing out, right? So don't want to spend too much more of your time on that. So what I'd like to do is to talk about 2 concepts before you break into your new groups, to reorganize folks into new groups, and some of your classmates are not here, so we'll have to make sure we notify them and encourage them to participate in their absence. So, so what I'd like for you to do is to get into groups of 3 or 4, and I want you to define or give examples of power and of privilege. All right, so how would you define power, or how do you define privilege? And I'll give in small groups. I'll give you about 5 minutes to do that. If it looks like folks are done before that, then I'll just bring us back together. All right. So define those 2 terms: power and privilege. All right.
Bottom line is cool.
I don't want to. I'm not going to.
Yeah, examples, yeah, definition.
Why do you gain power?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Side effect, yeah.
Oh my gosh, I wanted to ask you oh my god. Yeah. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm just like,
All right, well, it looks like lots of folks are done, so we won't use the whole 5 minutes. So in your conversations, how did you define power? Or what are some examples of power?
We talked about having like just dominance over like something or someone.
Okay, so dominance over something or someone. Raise your hand if your definition had something similar to that as a part of it. All right, cool. Other things that people suggested about power or examples of power. Yes, please.
We kind of talked about like the building blocks to power. And with that, people, like for example, like people who have money, or have, their appearance is better, or who are better at building relationships, or have better grades, that kind of thing. Like you all can hang out with people who have better grades, you study together, and that's kind of sets you up for power. If you have good relationships, it kind of sets you up for that thing. So, and it was kind of like a worth thing.
Okay.
People find their worth in that.
Okay.
And like that is what drives that power, and that privilege.
Okay.
And that's how.
So worth being worthy, right? Cool. How many people did baseball cards? Traded baseball cards or football cards or sports cards? Cool. How does that work? How does baseball card or sports cards trading work? How does that work?
You always want like the biggest and best player.
You want the biggest and best player, right? And so how does the trading part happen?
You want to give away like your least favorite player.
So you want to give away your least favorite or the least relevant player, right? And sometimes can you do it? Sometimes can you do it like a 4-to-1 trade?
Sure.
Right. So that's and the 4 would be for what? For the 1, right? So trade. Do you know what sports card trading is a childhood example of? What's that? Gambling? Not quite. But this is also gambling. The stock market. Right? Buy low, sell high, get the rookie card, right? I want the Shaquille O'Neal rookie card, which I had at one point. I probably should have kept it, huh? Right? So you get the low, sell it high, right? So it's teaching you about the stock market. Baseball card trading is not about baseball card trading or sports card trading. It's about how to look at the stock market. And so if you have access to that, then you have that information, which is really interesting. Right? How else do people define power? So dominance was one way that power is talked about. Yes.
So the ability to, for starters in a position of power, is the ability to assert like their view of what is right or how things should be onto others.
Okay, so exerting your worldview or how you see the world onto others could be an example of power, right? Yes. Influence can be power, right? Influence can be power. Do I have any physics folks in the room? All right. So in terms of physics, what is power?
Joules per second.
Joules per second. All right, he's still speaking not English. All right. So for those of us who are not, give it to me plain.
Okay, so it's energy per time.
Energy per time.
We talk about energy as the ability to do work.
And we talk about energy as the ability to do work. And sometimes I think it's also talked about as W over T equals power. Is that right? Could that be a layman's? Okay, right? So power is the ability to do work. And in our society, what do we need access to, or what do we need to have to actually be able to get things done in our society? So power. What are some other things that we need to be able to have access to get things done in our society? Time, certainly time, right? I'd imagine that many of your great-great-grandparents did not speak English when they came. But they were able to master English given enough time, right? What else do we need? So we have time. What else? Opportunities. What else? Say it louder.
Oh no, it wasn't that.
Oh, okay. No, I taught 8th grade. You move. I see everything. I don't respond to everything, but I see everything. What else? What else do we need to get things done in society?
Resources.
Resources. Give me some examples of resources.
Money.
Money! Money, 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 money! Make it rain, make it rain. Right, you gotta have money. Right? What else? People. Either people to support you, people to follow you, people to invest in you, or people to sell your things to, right? What else? What other things give us the ability to do work? Action, say more.
I mean, having the confidence or ability to do something, to actually take action and make something happen.
Okay, cool. The ability to take action, right? Both either in confidence or back to this idea of opportunity, right? The opportunity to take action. I would also say, other resources, I would say healthcare, education, right? So those are all access to things, all things that give us the ability to get things done. If I don't have a quality education, I'm limited in the kinds of things I can get done, right? So those are are wonderful things that you guys just talked about. So what is this idea of privilege? What is privilege? How did you talk about that in your small group? What is privilege? Yes.
Like an advantage that someone has for being part of like a group that they're in and if being a particular person.
Right. So an advantage that people have, particularly given a particular group that they're in, right? So it's an advantage. Can somebody look that up? Can somebody look up privilege for me and tell me like what are some of the like categories that might be associated with so-called privilege? Are there categories that could be associated with privilege?
Well, the first thing that comes up is white privilege.
Okay, so the first thing that came up in your search was white privilege. Okay. How did they define that?
I don't know. This is the first thing that came
This
up.
is the first thing that came up. All right, cool. Other folks, did you find a definition or are there categories associated with it?
It says, the first definition, a right, community, or benefit enjoyed only by a person beyond the advantages of most, like the privileges of the very rich.
Okay. So rich people have privileges. Are there any other? Yes, please.
It's like gender privilege, religious privilege, like heterosexual privileges.
So socioeconomic privileges, correct? So religious privilege, gender privilege, socioeconomic privilege, education privilege. You said white privilege, right? Are there categories that you would look at yourself and say you have privileges? Out of the things we just kind of listed, did you find yourself in any of those categories? Just say, yeah, you have privilege. You have privilege. We all have privilege. What I would suggest is that we're not pointing out privilege for people to be embarrassed by what they have or to be ashamed of what they have, but to acknowledge what you have, right? So acknowledge what you have. What did Uncle Ben Parker say to young Spider-Man? With great power comes great responsibility, right? I'm not exactly sure if he actually said that, but at least that's what they say in movies, right? So, so power and privilege. So what is the relationship between these two things? Why would I have us look at these two concepts together? Because they're linked. In what way are they linked?
People with privilege have an easier time getting into places of power and are often given a certain degree of power despite or regardless of their situation.
Right? That kind of feed each other. Both of these things kind of feed each other. Now, what the other thing that we have to recognize is that this power and this privilege is also contextual. It's contextual. So I may have privilege and power here at Bethel University, but if I go over to Thailand, I may not necessarily have the same power and privilege in Thailand that I have here, right? So it's also contextual, which is important to realize. And again, it's not about trying to fault or blame anyone. It is about the recognition of that power and privilege. So before assigning you new groups, and there are a couple of concepts that I want to talk about before I spend too much time talking, which I've already done. So I'll just spill the beans on this. So there are three concepts that I want us to be mindful of as we go into working in our groups. First is that bigotry is actually an emotion. Sometimes we'll talk about bigotry as being a lack of information, and that is not the case. Most bigoted people have enough information to fuel their bigotry, right? But actually, bigotry is an emotional state. So it is an emotion. And how do you change emotions? Can you use information to change emotions? I would say you can't. Think about a friend that you had that was sad. Did you bring them a PowerPoint presentation or Excel spreadsheet, a fact sheet about why they should not be sad? No. What did you do to help them get out of their sadness? Ice cream, cookies, take them out, right? Sit with them. Those kinds of things, because you want to change their emotion. I would suggest that prejudice is a thought. It's a thought or a thought process, not the other thought. Okay, never mind. You guys ever heard of that other thought? No? Okay. I'm on social media. I'm trying to get hip, right? So, at any rate. Oh, now you get it. Now you get it. Okay, cool. Anyway, so prejudice is a thought, right? So it's a thought process. It's about trying to envision things in your mind. How do you change someone's mind? You ask strategic questions. You can't battle them with more information. You ask strategic questions. And then lastly, discrimination is a behavior. And in cognitive behavior therapy, we talk about emotions plus thoughts dictate behaviors. In 1964, the government said that we will take care of discrimination by creating what? The Civil Rights Act of 1964. We will take care of discrimination, which is a behavior. So since 1964, we have no more discrimination, right? No, we still have discrimination. Why? There's a three-letter word that is associated with that, right? Sin. And she was like, I got that one. So discrimination is sin. It's a form of sin. But we also recognize that when they talked about this 1964 Civil Rights Act, that they were talking about mandating or being able to deal with people's behaviors, but they weren't talking about how to deal with people's emotions or thoughts. So can I think and can I be prejudiced in my thinking? Yes, I can, right? Can I be prejudiced or in my thoughts? Can I be bigoted in my emotions, how I feel about folks? I certainly can. What's problematic about that when we look at cognitive behavior therapy? When we think about this, what's problematic with me? I can have any emotions I want. I can have any thoughts that I want. But what is suggested by this cognitive behavior therapy model is that directly influences what? My behavior, right? So if I want to behave differently, I have to start thinking differently. I have to start feeling differently about things, right? So I'm going to leave that to that. So let's go to your work groups. So the first group is going to talk about behavior therapy. What is CBT? And what relationship does cognitive behavior therapy have to our understanding of discrimination? What is discrimination? How is it defined? Public opinion versus the legal opinion. Meaning, in society, we say discrimination is a particular thing, but what does the law say is discrimination? Group C, what is prejudice and what are some forms of prejudice? And what relationship does cognitive behavior have to prejudice? Group D, what is FERPA? And what is important for us to understand about FERPA as it relates to gender equity? And how is FERPA designated? And then lastly, what relationship does cognitive behavior therapy have to discrimination? How does discrimination or discriminatory acts, how do they get resolved? Individually, through the courts, and socially. All right? So your groups are as such. Group A is Alex, Megan, Sam, Mike, Marissa, and Peter. Group B, Tyler W., Alex, Joanna, Brandon, Addie and Katie. Group C, Tyler V, Maggie, Kyle, Mitchell, Nick, and Michaela. Group D, Tyler S, Nathan, Sam, Palmer, Connor, Kylie, and Rachel. And then group E is Christopher, Brendan, Darlene Olson, Haley, and Emily. All right. Did I miss any? Oh, yes. You Alex, in group A. Sorry. All right. Any other questions? I did get everybody, right? All right, cool. So if you want to get into your groups.
Group D is over here.
So group B is here.
We're taking our neighbor.
No, your piece of So we
I do
are.
All right.
I'm not gonna do anything. I can do whatever you guys want me to do.
Brendan, your group B. Yeah. Oh, I'm doing. I'm
I'll make a email slide. We're all good.
You have like two people right now.
I guess I do.
Well, I'm you up. We're group E.
Yep. So it's Christopher, Brendan, Darlene, and so, yeah. So Christopher's not here. And Brendan's not here. So I will.
Three people, so it's just.
So, you guys write this down. You know what? I'll do that right now.
Yeah, I'll meet you in the study room.
Christopher, I'll write it. Don't worry about it. I'll do it right now.
Okay.
Yeah, we're wait, there you go.
Yeah, Rachel, your group.
Okay.
Actually, I didn't put my questions. I mean, you want.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes, great.
Yeah.
Very good.
So what do you guys do?
Sweet.
So do you want to just like?
Wait, what am I doing?
Yeah. Okay, cool. What's the title of this?
This is discrimination. It's week 5. Yep. Discrimination in education, week 5.
On this side, it says
There was also a second.
Oh, it does say week 8. Two. But this is the one I want, is week 8. So I'll make sure.
I'll do the third one.
Where
else?
Here it is.
You know what? Oh, yeah, you're gonna make the rest of this.
This is our group.
Oh.
No, I'm just. Yeah, okay, that'd be awesome. Yep, and then also I have. Oh, you're so cool.
Next level tactics.
How many people are in the
There are 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, so I'm gonna write, I'm writing everybody to let them know what group they're in, particularly people who are missing. No, what's that? Yeah, there's just 2 people missing, and that's,
Emily and then the 2 guys. So there's
Yep.
3 people.
Yep, there's 3 people missing, so. You'll see the email in just a second.
Hello? No, it's strange, they keep getting called with my credit card.
And then you can put their names after. It's for.
Oh, you did Emily, Christopher, and Emily.
Get Emily in twice.
Oh,
She has to do double work.
right. Sorry.
So it's Brenda.
Cool. Oh, it's Brendan is who's missing.
You can always.
Okay.
Honestly, prejudice. I have Okay, let's see what I can find.
Yeah. Have a good rest of your day.
We're getting better.
Actually, there was something, this isn't as much of an observation as it's a ponderment that I've had. Kind of something that dawned on you when you were talking about disenfranchised young white males is the disenfranchised young white males find themselves feeling alienated and they don't know what to do, and they feel themselves driven to do things like school shootings, like bombings. On the flip side, you could say that the disenfranchised young Black or Hispanic, or that they feel inclined to go into a gang because that's something that it is easier to find. I'm not gonna say easier, but you see them kind of trend more towards gangs than a young white male would. I'm not saying that these are mutually exclusive or anything like that, but
Yep.
it's kind of something that, do you have this thought on that, or?
Yeah, no, I would say that, again, I think I alluded to it, that, particularly Hispanic and Black youth or small youth have a set of resiliency skills, which is exemplified by the example that you gave of joining gangs, right? So if I'm feeling alienated, I have people who also feel alienated that I can join.
Yeah.
Which is also what I believe is the root of white nationalism, is joining a group of people who have, right?
Yeah.
But there are these lone folks who don't have that. So I think part of it is the skills of building resiliency that disenfranchised white males don't have. And because it's a skill, it can be developed, right? So it's not innate, but it was for how I'm looking at things and trying to be helpful in solving problems. That's one of the places that I go to. And I'm not suggesting that building the skill of resiliency by joining a gang is a good thing. I'm not saying that, but I am saying that it changes the dynamic. And the other thing that is also becoming apparent that we have to identify and wrestle with is, particularly communities of color, they typically are more collectivist than they are individualistic. And so when you have disenfranchisement from an individualistic culture, that's like a double, triple win, because you were already by yourself, and now you're alienated from the other people who are by themselves. So, your isolation becomes magnified. Whereas, again, people of color typically remain collectivists, either through necessity of being forced into collectiveness, or having this kind of natural inclination to be the people like themselves. And for me, at this point, it's kind of hard to know the difference between people being forced into being collectivists versus this is just their nature kind of thing. Because even if you look at Celtic folks, the Irish are collectivists. They're black, so and they're white. So you can't just say it's whatever. So
they weren't considered white for a long time.
For a long time.
So you could argue that they're not white because of that. So,
right.
The whole white thing becomes you can still say that there's so much that, how long before it's the next group, like the Shelbyville film?
Yeah.
Because it's at some point the whatever they say, that it's gonna drop on the other side, and the hat's gonna drop on the other side, and then things are gonna change.
But this is what I would tell you though, that things will not change until, so right now, those disenfranchised, okay. So when white people wake up and recognize that it's not black people who are disenfranchising, right? So like the bomber's problem was, he saw black people as the problem, and black people are not the problem. In so much that there's a system that he's being blocked out of, that we got to talk about that system, because for black people and white people, again, the mental illness of an individual or the individual act that people are committing without taking into consideration the larger picture becomes satisfying, or it relieves the conscience of the recognition that there's something bigger at play. So that's my 2 cents. So if you can bring that up in class on Friday, that would be cool to have us kind of think about that. Yeah. few monologues, but
It's informative, and that's all that matters.
yeah,